My name is Elaine Patterson, and at 67, I never expected to be sitting alone in my Portland apartment, staring at a phone with my son Michael's name lighting up the screen. 26 years of silence shattered by one newspaper article about my unexpected $4.2 million inheritance from my brother Howard. Suddenly, Michael wanted me to spend Christmas with his family. I said yes immediately, my voice steady despite my racing heart. What Michael never suspected was that I had absolutely no intention of showing up. Before I tell you what really happened that Christmas, drop a comment where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself when family only wants your money. I grew up in a small Massachusetts town where everyone knew each other by first name. My parents, Grace and Thomas, ran the local hardware store and raised me with values of honesty and hard work. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable and loving. Those childhood lessons about valuing people over possessions would eventually serve me well, though I'd forget them for a while in my desperate attempts to maintain family connections. I met Robert Patterson during my sophomore year at the State University. He was studying architecture, tall with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that drew me in immediately. Our first date was at a campus coffee shop where we talked until they closed. 6 months later, he proposed with a tiny diamond ring he'd saved for by working weekends at a construction company. We married right after graduation in a simple ceremony at my parents' church. Robert found work at an architecture firm in Boston, and we settled into a modest starter home in a nice suburb. 3 years later, our son Michael arrived. I can still remember the weight of him in my arms that first day, his tiny fingers curling around mine. I fell in love instantly, completely, the way mothers do. Our life together was beautiful in its ordinariness. Robert's career slowly advanced, and we moved to a larger home when Michael was 7. Weekends were filled with little league games, backyard barbecues, and family movie nights. Michael was a bright, curious child with Robert's analytical mind and my empathy. He collected baseball cards, built elaborate Lego structures, and slept with his stuffed bear until he was 12, though he'd never admit that to his friends. Every summer, we'd spend 2 weeks at a small lake cabin my parents owned. Michael would splash in the water from sunrise to sunset, his skin turning golden brown, hair bleached nearly white by the sun. In the evenings, Robert would build a campfire, and we'd roast marshmallows while telling stories. Those memories sustained me through many dark nights years later. The changes began when Michael entered high school. I attributed his increasing distance to normal teenage development at first. He joined the debate team and student council, developing new interests and friends. The warm, affectionate boy who once couldn't go to sleep without a hug from me began avoiding family dinners and responding to questions with shrugs or single words. By senior year, Michael had transformed into someone focused entirely on achievement and social status. Robert and I were proud of his academic success but concerned about the values he seemed to be adopting. His new friends drove expensive cars bought by their parents. He began commenting on our home being small compared to his friends' houses, our cars outdated. Still, we believed this was a phase that would pass. We scrimped and saved to send Michael to Dartmouth, his dream school. Robert took on extra projects. I started working full-time at a local elementary school library, and we postponed renovations on our aging home. It was worth every sacrifice to give our son opportunities we never had. During his senior year at college, Michael met Vanessa Williams. She came from wealthy Connecticut society, her father a hedge fund manager, her mother from old money. The first time Michael brought her home, I sensed her discomfort in our modest house. She barely touched the pot roast I'd spent all day preparing, asked if we had sparkling water instead of tap, and kept checking her phone throughout dinner. "Your home is so quaint," she said in a tone that made it clear quaint wasn't a compliment. Their wedding 2 years later was lavish, held at a historic mansion with 300 guests, most of whom we'd never met. Vanessa's parents paid for everything and made all the decisions. I was allowed minimal input, not even choosing my own mother of the groom dress. During the reception, I overheard Vanessa telling a friend, "We'll fix his background. Nobody needs to know where he came from." After the wedding, the distance grew. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Invitations to visit were always postponed. When we did see them, Vanessa made subtle comments about our clothes, our accents, our lack of knowledge about wine or art. Michael began echoing her opinions, looking embarrassed when Robert told one of his corny jokes, or when I mentioned my book club. Robert's health began deteriorating when he turned 60. Heart disease ran in his family, and despite medication and lifestyle changes, his condition worsened. Michael visited only twice during the 3 years of Robert's illness. The last time they saw each other, Michael and Robert argued about politics, ending with Michael stating that his parents' views were embarrassingly outdated, and something he had to overcome. When Robert died, Michael flew in for the funeral but left immediately after, claiming work obligations. I was numb with grief, barely processing his quick departure. 2 weeks later, Michael called to say he needed space, and would reach out when he was ready. That was the last conversation we had for 26 years. The first year after Robert died was a blur of paperwork, grief counseling, and sleepless nights in our suddenly too large house. I kept expecting to hear his key in the lock, to feel the mattress dip when he climbed into bed. The silence was deafening. The silence from Michael was even worse. I called every Sunday for months, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that were never returned. I sent birthday cards, Christmas gifts, handwritten letters describing my days, asking about his life. The Christmas gifts were returned unopened. The letters received no response. Through mutual friends, I learned Michael and Vanessa had 3 children. Lucas was born just 6 months after Robert's funeral. Emma arrived 2 years later, followed by Nathan 3 years after that. I had 3 grandchildren I'd never met, who didn't know I existed. I sent baby gifts when I heard about each birth. Beautiful handmade blankets, silver rattles, children's books with inscriptions. All returned with address unknown written on the packages, though I knew perfectly well they still lived in the same Beacon Hill townhouse. After 5 years of this treatment, I fell into a deep depression. My doctor prescribed medication, but pills couldn't fix a broken heart. Friends invited me to their family gatherings, but watching their interactions with their children and grandchildren only highlighted what I'd lost. The large colonial house where we'd raised Michael became a mausoleum of memories. I couldn't bear to enter his old bedroom, preserved exactly as he'd left it for college. Eventually, my therapist gently suggested selling the house might be a necessary step in healing. Took another year before I could do it. The day the new family moved in, a young couple with twin toddlers, I sat in my car across the street and sobbed until I had no tears left. That night, I checked into a hotel and looked through real estate listings for apartments. It was time to build a new life, one without ghosts. I found a small apartment near the elementary school where I still worked as a librarian. At 54, I was grateful for the job, for the children's laughter and curiosity that temporarily filled the void in my heart. I started attending a support group for estranged parents, finding solace in shared experiences. There I met Diana Roberts, another widow whose only daughter had cut contact after marrying a controlling husband. Diana's matter-of-fact approach to her situation helped me gain perspective. "We can't make them love us," she would say. "We can only love ourselves enough to keep going." Diana encouraged me to find new passions. I signed up for a beginner's painting class at the community center, discovering an unexpected talent for watercolors. I joined a hiking group, exploring New England's beautiful trails every weekend. I volunteered at an animal shelter, eventually adopting an elderly cat named Oliver who became my constant companion. Still, every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day I sent cards to Michael. For the grandchildren, I opened savings accounts, depositing money each month for their future education. I doubted they'd ever receive these funds, but it gave me purpose to provide for them from afar. After 10 years of returned mail and unanswered calls, I mailed one final letter. I poured my heart onto those pages, telling Michael I would always love him, would always be his mother, would always welcome him back without questions or recriminations. I told him about his grandchildren's savings accounts. I gave him my email address, my phone number, my promise to respond immediately if he ever reached out. That letter, like all the others, came back marked return to sender. My therapist suggested a symbolic ceremony to help me accept the permanence of the estrangement. On what would have been Robert and my 40th wedding anniversary, I took all of Michael's returned letters and gifts to a quiet spot on the beach. I read each letter aloud to the waves, then burned them in a small fire, watching the ashes scatter in the wind. I didn't stop loving my son, but I stopped expecting him to love me back. With Diana's encouragement, I applied for a position at a progressive library in Portland, Oregon. At 60, starting over in a new city seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. The library director, impressed by my experience and enthusiasm, offered me the job. Within 2 months, I sold most of my possessions, packed my car with the essentials and Oliver, and drove across the country to my new life. Portland embraced me with its quirky charm, stunning natural beauty, and community of open-hearted people. I rented a small apartment near a park, decorated with my own watercolor paintings, and slowly built a circle of friends through work, art classes, and a hiking group for seniors. For the first time in decades, I felt like Elaine Patterson, not just Robert's widow or Michael's estranged mother. The certified letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. I almost missed the mail carrier, having just returned from my morning walk along the Willamette River. The return address showed a law firm in Seattle I didn't recognize. My first thought was that it must be a mistake. It wasn't. The letter informed me that my brother Howard had passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. Howard and I had never been close. He was 10 years older, had left home for college when I was still in elementary school, and had built his life on the opposite coast. We exchanged Christmas cards and occasional phone calls, nothing more. What stunned me was learning that Howard, the brother who lived modestly and never married, had amassed a small fortune through early investments in several tech companies. More shocking still, he had named me his sole beneficiary. The estate, once taxes were paid, amounted to $4.2 million. I read the letter 3 times, then called the law firm to verify it wasn't an elaborate scam. The attorney Judith Henderson confirmed everything. Howard had died without a will, but as his only living relative, I was entitled to his entire estate. Your brother lived quite frugally, Judith explained. Most people had no idea he had accumulated such wealth. He was an early investor in several tech startups that became enormously successful. In the following weeks, I met with financial advisors recommended by the law firm. At 67, suddenly having millions required careful planning. Thomas Wilson, a certified financial planner with silver hair and a grandfatherly manner, helped me develop a strategy that ensured my security while allowing me to fulfill some long-held dreams. You're in an enviable position, Thomas said during our 3rd meeting. You can maintain a comfortable lifestyle, help causes you care about, and still leave a significant legacy. My plans for the money were modest by most standards. First, I bought a small but lovely craftsman home in a quiet Portland neighborhood. After decades of renting, owning a home again brought a sense of stability I hadn't realized I was missing. I furnished it simply but beautifully, creating a peaceful sanctuary for my final decades. Next, I established a scholarship fund at the library where I worked, providing educational opportunities for underprivileged children. Growing up with limited means myself and working with children who face significant barriers to education, this felt like the most meaningful use of my unexpected wealth. The local newspaper ran a feature about the scholarship fund, including my photograph and the story of my career as a librarian. I was uncomfortable with the attention but hoped it might inspire others to support literacy initiatives. I never imagined the story would be picked up by national outlets looking for heartwarming human interest pieces, or that it would eventually reach Michael's attention in Boston. A week after the article appeared, several friends warned me about suddenly appearing relatives who might have financial motives. It happens all the time, said Patricia Johnson, my neighbor and fellow watercolor enthusiast. Long-lost cousins and nephews coming out of the woodwork when they smell money. I laughed it off, explaining I had no extended family left. Only later did I realize I'd forgotten to count the most obvious potential claimants. The first sign came via social media. Though I rarely use Facebook, I maintained a basic profile to see photos friends shared of their grandchildren and travels. One morning, I opened the app to find a friend request from Vanessa Williams Patterson. After 26 years of silence, my daughter-in-law suddenly wanted to connect. I ignored the request, a knot forming in my stomach. The timing was too coincidental to be genuine. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Perhaps she'd seen the article and felt guilty about the long estrangement. Perhaps Michael didn't even know she'd reached out. 3 days later, while shopping at my neighborhood grocery store, I noticed a man who resembled an older version of Michael watching me from the produce section. When I turned to look directly at him, he quickly moved away. By the time I reached the checkout, he was gone. I convinced myself I was imagining things, seeing my son in strangers because he was on my mind. I wasn't imagining the phone call that came the following Tuesday. I was watering my front garden when my cell phone rang. The area code was Boston, but I didn't recognize the number. Normally, I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, balancing the phone against my shoulder while setting down the watering can. "Mom? It's Michael." The voice was deeper, more mature than I remembered, but unmistakably my son's. My knees weakened and I sank onto the front porch steps. "Michael," I managed to say, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it through the phone. "Yeah, it's me. How are you?" His tone was casual, as if we'd spoken last week instead of 26 years ago. I'm well," I stammered, struggling to process that I was actually speaking to my son. "This is quite a surprise." "Yeah, I know it's been a while," he said, offering no apology for the decades of silence. "I happened to see that article about you. The scholarship thing. That's really great." No mention of returning my letters. No acknowledgement of missed birthdays, Christmases, Mother's Days. No explanation for denying me knowledge of my grandchildren. "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's a cause I care deeply about." "So you're in Portland now? The house looks nice in the photo." "Yes, for about 7 years now. I love it here." There was an awkward pause before he continued. "So listen, I was thinking. It's been too long. Vanessa and I would love to have you come for Christmas this year. The kids have never met their grandmother. Lucas is 24 now, Emma's 21, and Nathan is 17. They'd love to meet you." My mind was spinning. After 26 years of complete silence, he wanted me to believe this sudden interest in reconnection had nothing to do with my inheritance? That his children, who'd grown up never knowing me, were suddenly eager to meet their grandmother? That would be nice, I heard myself say, buying time to process what was happening. "Great. We have plenty of room. Our house in Wellesley has 6 bedrooms. We can get you a first-class ticket." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes. Michael asking vague questions about my situation and making comments about various expenses his family faced. Lucas was considering law school. Emma was engaged and planning a wedding. Their investment portfolio had underperformed recently. Not once did he ask about my life during the years of separation. Not once did he express regret for cutting me out of his children's lives. Not once did he acknowledge the pain he'd caused. After we hung up, I sat on those porch steps for a long time, tears streaming down my face. The call I'd dreamed of for decades had finally come, but it brought no joy. Only a crushing realization that my son saw me as a potential source of money, not as his mother. That evening I called Diana, who had relocated to Arizona but remained my closest confidant. "Of course it's about the money," she said bluntly after hearing the story. "The timing makes that obvious." "I want to believe he genuinely wants to reconnect," I said, knowing how pathetic I sounded. "Elaine, listen to yourself. If he wanted to reconnect, he could have done it any time in the past 26 years. Has he explained why he returned all your gifts? Why he never told his children about you? Why he waited until you had millions to suddenly remember he has a mother?" She was right and I knew it. Still, a small part of me wanted to believe this could be the beginning of healing our relationship. The rational part of me, however, was forming a plan. "I wonder what would happen if I accepted the invitation but didn't show up," I mused. "If I let him think I'm coming, then at the last minute, he'll learn I'm not wealthy after all." "That's one approach," Diana said cautiously. "But are you prepared for the fallout? For losing any chance of relationship with your grandchildren? If the relationship is only based on money, is it worth having?" I countered. After our call, I spent hours researching Michael and Vanessa online. Their social media profiles showed a lavish lifestyle. Vacations in the Maldives, skiing in Aspen, sailing on what appeared to be a private yacht. But deeper digging revealed concerning information. A public records search showed a foreclosure notice on their Wellesley home filed 2 years earlier. Bankruptcy court records indicated Vanessa's interior design business had failed, leaving substantial debts. Michael's architectural firm had lost several major clients during the economic downturn. They needed money and they'd identified a potential source. I made a decision that night. I would accept the Christmas invitation but book a cruise to Hawaii for the same period. I would let Michael believe I was coming, right up until Christmas Eve when he would learn I had other plans. It felt petty, perhaps even cruel, but after 26 years of silence followed by such transparent financial interest, I couldn't bring myself to play the role of the doting mother with an open checkbook. The next morning, I called a travel agent and booked a deluxe stateroom on a 14-day Hawaiian cruise departing December 23rd. Then I called Michael back and told him I'd be delighted to spend Christmas with his family. "I can't wait to finally meet my grandchildren," I said, the half-truth catching in my throat. "They're excited too," he replied, though I doubted he'd even told them about me yet. As I hung up, I wondered if this deception made me no better than my son. But then I remembered the decades of returned letters, the milestones missed, the cruel silence. No, this wasn't about revenge. It was about finding out whether Michael wanted a relationship with me, Elaine the mother, or just access to Elaine the unexpected millionaire. Over the next few weeks, Michael called regularly, sometimes twice in a single week. After 26 years of silence, the sudden attention was jarring. Our conversations remained superficial. He asked detailed questions about my inheritance but showed little interest in my life in Portland, my friends, or my interests. Then Vanessa began calling separately, her voice honey-sweet, nothing like the cold dismissiveness I remembered from our few interactions years ago. "Elaine, we're just thrilled you're coming for Christmas," she gushed during our first call. "I've been redecorating the guest room just for you." "That's very thoughtful," I replied, knowing I would never see this room. "Michael tells me you've done quite well for yourself," she continued. "That scholarship program sounds wonderful. We've always valued education too, you know. Lucas is considering Harvard Law, though the tuition is astronomical these days." There it was, the first hint at needing financial assistance. I murmured non-committally. "And Emma's engagement is so exciting, but wedding costs have skyrocketed since our day. We're looking at venues in Newport, very exclusive." By the end of the call, she'd mentioned their investment opportunity that needed capital, Nathan's desire to attend an expensive soccer camp, and their aging roof that needed replacement. None of these comments were direct requests, but the implication was clear. The manipulation escalated when photos of my grandchildren began arriving by email. Lucas looked remarkably like Michael at that age, with the same serious eyes and strong jawline. Emma had Vanessa's delicate features but Robert's kind smile. Nathan, the youngest, was a perfect blend of both parents. These were the children I should have watched grow up, should have baked cookies with red stories to, cheered at soccer games and school plays. Looking at their adult and near-adult faces for the first time, I felt the full weight of what Michael had stolen from us all. One evening, Michael called with a specific question that confirmed my suspicions about his motives. "Mom, I hope you don't mind me asking, but the article wasn't specific about the amount you inherited. Was it substantial?" I paused, considering my response carefully. "It was enough to provide security for my retirement," I said vaguely. "Right, but I mean, are we talking hundreds of thousands or?" "The media tends to exaggerate these things," I replied, neither confirming nor denying the actual amount. Of course," he backpedaled. "I'm just concerned about your financial security. As your son, I want to make sure you're being properly advised." The irony of his sudden concern after decades of indifference was not lost on me. A week later, a package arrived containing expensive wine, gourmet chocolates, and monogrammed towels. The card read, "Looking forward to reuniting our family this Christmas. Love, Michael, Vanessa, and the kids." The same day, Vanessa called to say they'd cleared their busy holiday schedule just for my visit. Strange, considering her previous claim that they always spent Christmas at home. "We usually travel to Vail for the holidays, but this year is special," she said, contradicting her earlier story about holiday renovations preventing travel. As Christmas approached, the calls increased in frequency, each containing subtle references to their financial needs and the inheritance. Michael mentioned their mortgage refinancing falling through. Vanessa talked about Emma's fiancé coming from good family, but not much money, necessitating her parents covering wedding costs. Lucas apparently needed a new car to project the right image for law school interviews. Throughout these conversations, I continued finalizing my cruise arrangements, securing shore excursions, and packing appropriate clothing. I told no one but Diana about my actual plans, not even my Portland friends Patricia and Thomas, who believed I was genuinely reconnecting with my estranged son. "Are you sure about this, Elaine?" Patricia asked over coffee one morning. "It seems like a lot to process all at once. Meeting grandchildren you've never known, spending the holidays with people who've hurt you deeply." "I need to do this," I said, feeling guilty about my deception but unable to share the full truth. Thomas was more direct. "Just be careful. People who've shown they don't value you don't suddenly change overnight. Protect your heart and your assets." As December progressed, I began having nightmares about the confrontation that would inevitably occur when Michael realized I wasn't coming for Christmas and had no intention of funding his lifestyle. In these dreams, he would rage at me, confirming that money was all he cared about. I would wake up shaking, Oliver purring concernedly beside me. My weekly therapy sessions intensified as I processed the complex emotions surrounding this situation. Dr. Carter, who had helped me work through the initial grief of estrangement, now guided me through the anger and sadness of this false reconciliation. "What do you really want from this, Elaine?" she asked during a particularly difficult session. "I want to know if any part of him still loves me as his mother," I admitted. "I want to know if there's anything left to salvage. And if there isn't, then I need to know that too so I can truly move on." 2 weeks before Christmas, I made a decision that surprised even me. I canceled my cruise reservation, losing the substantial deposit. Instead, I booked a flight to Boston, reserved a hotel room, and rented a car. I would go to Michael's house for Christmas after all, not to play the role he expected, but to confront the reality of our relationship head-on. I wouldn't be the wealthy mother prepared to solve their financial problems. I would simply be Elaine Patterson, a 67-year-old woman who wanted honesty after decades of painful silence. The flight to Boston on December 23rd was turbulent, mirroring my emotional state. As the plane descended through gray winter clouds, I rehearsed what I would say to Michael, to Vanessa, to the grandchildren I'd never known. The script kept changing in my mind, varying from calm dignity to righteous anger to tearful pleas for explanation. I spent Christmas Eve in my hotel room service turkey dinner on a tray, watching holiday movies and trying to quiet my racing thoughts. I called Diana, who reassured me I was doing the right thing by confronting the situation directly rather than avoiding it. "Just remember, whatever happens tomorrow isn't a reflection on you," she said. "You've been a loving mother. His choices are his responsibility, not yours." Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, a light dusting of snow making the scene picture perfect. I dressed carefully in a burgundy sweater and black pants, applied minimal makeup, and drove the rental car to the address Michael had provided in Wellesley. The house was larger than I expected, a sprawling colonial on a corner lot with professional landscaping and a 3-car garage. Despite the foreclosure notice I discovered, they were still living in considerable luxury. 2 expensive cars sat in the driveway, a Mercedes SUV and a BMW sedan. I sat in my rental car for several minutes, gathering courage. Finally, I took a deep breath, grabbed the small gift bags I'd brought for each family member, and walked to the front door. The doorbell chimed melodiously inside. Moments later, the door swung open to reveal Michael, his expression shifting from holiday cheer to shock when he saw me standing there in person. "Mom," he said, recovering quickly. "You made it. We were starting to worry when we couldn't reach you yesterday." "My flight was delayed," I lied, stepping inside when he moved aside. The foyer was impressive with high ceilings, marble floors, and a sweeping staircase. Holiday decorations worthy of a magazine spread adorned every surface. The air smelled of pine, cinnamon, and roasting meat. "Vanessa, kids, she's here," Michael called, leading me into a large living room where a massive Christmas tree surrounded by beautifully wrapped presents dominated one corner. Vanessa appeared from what I assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron that looked brand new and never used for actual cooking. Her smile froze when she saw me, eyes widening slightly before she composed herself. Elaine, what a wonderful surprise. We thought perhaps you'd changed your mind when we couldn't reach you. The airline lost my phone charger, I improvised, accepting her stiff hug. 3 young adults entered the room, looking curious and slightly confused. Lucas, the oldest, had Michael's build and serious expression. Emma was slim and elegant, clearly her mother's daughter in style and demeanor. Nathan, the teenager, hung back slightly, looking uncomfortable in a sweater that still had creases from the store packaging. Kids, this is your grandmother Elaine, Michael said, his voice overly bright. Mom, these are our children Lucas, Emma, and Nathan. I studied their faces, looking for any sign of recognition or genuine emotion. What I saw instead was polite confusion. Nice to meet you, Lucas said, extending his hand formally. You too, I replied, shaking it. I've waited a long time for this moment. Emma gave me an air kiss near my cheek. Dad told us you were coming just last week. It was quite a surprise. Nathan nodded awkwardly. The revelation stung but didn't surprise me. Michael hadn't told his children about my visit until a week ago, probably when he was certain I was actually coming. I wondered what else he hadn't told them. Well, this is lovely, Vanessa interjected, clapping her hands together. Dinner's almost ready. Michael, why don't you show your mother around while I finish up? The tour of their home confirmed my suspicions about their financial situation. The furnishings were expensive but showed signs of wear. Several rooms appeared unused. The renovations Michael had mentioned were nowhere to be seen. It was the home of a family maintaining appearances while struggling financially. During dinner, a lavish spread that must have cost hundreds, the conversation remained superficial. Vanessa dominated, name-dropping acquaintances from their social circle, mentioning their country club membership, discussing Lucas's law school prospects. Harvard's our first choice, of course, she said, refilling my wine glass for the 3rd time. The connections are invaluable, though the cost is prohibitive these days. Education is certainly expensive, I agreed neutrally. Emma's wedding is our other big expense right now, Vanessa continued smoothly. June in Newport. The venue alone is 6 figures. Lucas mentioned his interest in international law, specializing in wealth management. Nathan talked about a soccer academy in Europe he hoped to attend. Every topic somehow circled back to expenses, investments, or financial concerns. Not once did anyone ask about my life during the years of separation. Not once did Michael acknowledge his role in keeping me from knowing my grandchildren. Not once did anyone express genuine interest in who I was as a person rather than a potential source of funds. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. Vanessa positioned me in an armchair facing the rest of the family, who sat together on the sofa, a united front. Elaine, Vanessa began, setting down her coffee cup. We've been thinking about your situation. My situation? I repeated. Yes. Being alone at your age, managing a substantial inheritance without family support. It must be overwhelming. Michael jumped in. What Vanessa means is we're concerned about you. Managing that kind of money requires expertise. What kind of money do you think I have, Michael? I asked directly. He looked momentarily flustered. Well, the article mentioned millions. We just want to make sure you're being properly advised. And what advice would you offer? Actually, Vanessa interjected. We have an investment opportunity that's perfect for someone in your position. Very exclusive, excellent returns, and it would help family at the same time. I see, I said quietly. Mom, Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. We know we haven't been as close as we should have been. I take responsibility for that. But we're family and family should help each other, right? Lucas needs tuition. Emma needs wedding funds. Our business needs capital to grow. It was the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and placed my coffee cup carefully on the side table. Before we discuss financial matters, I have some questions, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Michael, why did you return every birthday card, every Christmas gift I sent for 10 years after your father died? Why did you tell your children nothing about me until a week ago? Why, after 26 years of complete silence, did you only contact me after learning I had inherited money? The room went completely still. Lucas, Emma, and Nathan looked at their father in confusion. "You sent gifts?" Emma asked. "We never knew we had a grandmother until Dad told us about this visit." "I sent gifts for every birthday, every Christmas, for all of you," I confirmed. "I opened college savings accounts for each of you when you were born. I wrote letters every month for years. All returned unopened." Michael's face had drained of color. "Mom, that's ancient history. We've all made mistakes. Is it a mistake to hide your mother's existence from your children? Is it a mistake to return Christmas gifts with address unknown written on them when the address was perfectly valid? Or were those deliberate choices?" Vanessa's pleasant facade cracked. "This is hardly the time for accusations. We're trying to move forward as a family." "Are we?" I asked. "Because it seems to me we're moving forward as a financial arrangement. You haven't asked about my life, my interests, my health. You've asked about my money." I reached into my purse and removed the foreclosure notice and bankruptcy filing I'd printed out. I placed them on the coffee table. "I did some research before coming here. You're in financial trouble. The house is in foreclosure. Vanessa's business went bankrupt. Michael's firm has lost clients. You're not looking to reunite with a long-lost mother and grandmother. You're looking for a bailout." The shock on their faces would have been comical in another context. Nathan looked mortified. Emma seemed confused. Lucas watched with calculating eyes, perhaps recognizing a negotiation underway. "How dare you?" Vanessa sputtered. "Coming into our home on Christmas and attacking us." "I'm not attacking anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm stating facts that should have been disclosed if we were having an honest conversation about family helping family." Michael attempted damage control. "Mom, yes, we've had some financial setbacks. Many people have in this economy. But that doesn't mean we don't want you in our lives. Doesn't it? Because for 26 years you didn't want me in your lives. Not when I was grieving your father. Not when I was struggling financially. Not when I was alone on every holiday and birthday. Only when I supposedly had millions did you suddenly remember you had a mother." I turned to my grandchildren. "I want you to know I tried to be part of your lives from the beginning. I sent gifts your parents returned. I wrote letters they never shared. I kept your photos on my nightstand, even though we'd never met. I'm sorry we lost those years, but it wasn't my choice." Emma's eyes had filled with tears. Lucas looked troubled. Nathan stared at his parents with a new wariness. "Is that true?" Lucas asked his father. "You kept her from us intentionally?" Before Michael could answer, I delivered my final revelation. "There's one more thing you should know. The newspaper article exaggerated the amount of my inheritance for dramatic effect. It wasn't millions. It was $40,000. Enough for a modest down payment on my Portland house, but that's all. I'm comfortable, but I'm not wealthy. I have nothing to give you beyond what grandmothers typically provide. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, occasional treats. No tuition payments, no wedding funds, no business investments." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's face contorted with barely concealed rage and disappointment. Michael looked stunned, then embarrassed. My grandchildren's reactions varied. Lucas seemed to be recalculating. Emma looked mortified, and Nathan actually seemed relieved. "So this was all a test?" Michael finally asked, his voice tight. "Not initially," I answered honestly. "When you called, part of me hoped it was genuine. But your questions about money, your hints about expenses, they made your motives clear. So yes, I decided to find out if you wanted a relationship with me, or just with my supposed fortune." I stood up, gathering my purse. "I think I have my answer." I left their house amid stunned silence, no one even rising to show me to the door. Driving back to my hotel through quiet Christmas streets, tears blurred my vision, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. There was relief in finally confronting the reality I had suspected but never confirmed. There was pride in standing up for myself. There was grief for the relationships that might have been, but also a strange peace in knowing the truth. Back in my hotel room, I changed into comfortable pajamas, ordered another room service meal, and called Diana to report what had happened. "I'm proud of you," she said after listening to the whole story. "That took incredible courage." "I feel empty," I admitted. "Like I've lost them all over again." Maybe, Diana said gently. Or maybe this is the beginning of something honest, even if it's painful right now. I didn't expect to hear from any of them again, so the text that arrived later that evening surprised me. Grandma Elaine, this is Lucas. I got your number from Dad's phone. Can we talk tomorrow? Alone. The next morning, Lucas met me in the hotel lobby. Without his parents' presence, he seemed younger, less guarded. Over coffee, he asked questions about his grandfather, about my life, about the years his parents had kept me away. I always wondered why we had no extended family, he said. Dad told us his parents died before we were born. Finding out you've been alive all this time, trying to reach us, it's hard to process. I'm sorry you had to learn about it this way, I told him. That wasn't my intention when I came here. No, I'm glad you told us the truth. We deserve to know. Before we parted, Lucas hugged me, the first genuine embrace I'd received from any family member in decades. I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay, he said. Get to know my grandmother, money or no money. That afternoon, Emma called. Her conversation was punctuated by tears and apologies for her parents' behavior. I feel like I've been living in a bubble, she said. Finding out we have a grandmother who wanted to know us all along. It changes everything. Nathan, the youngest, was the most wounded by the revelation. A week later, after returning to Portland, I received an email from him expressing his confusion and anger at being lied to his entire life. I always felt something was missing in our family, he wrote. Now I know what it was. Michael's response came in the form of an angry voicemail accusing me of humiliating him in front of his children and ruining Christmas. I didn't return the call. A month later, however, I received an email that suggested the beginning of reflection. Mom, I owe you an apology. My behavior at Christmas and for many years before was inexcusable. I can't undo the past, but I want you to know I'm facing the truth about my actions and their consequences. The kids want a relationship with you. I hope someday you might be willing to give me another chance to. I responded with clear boundaries. Any relationship between us must be based on honesty and genuine care, not financial expectations. I'm open to slowly rebuilding connections with you and your family, but only with complete transparency about the past and present. Over the following year, I developed individual relationships with each grandchild. Lucas visited Portland during spring break, exploring the city with me and sharing his genuine interest in international humanitarian law, not the wealth management Vanessa had pushed. Emma called weekly, sending photos of her scaled-down wedding plans that now included a special role for her newfound grandmother. When Nathan turned 18, he contacted me about visiting during summer vacation, eager to escape the tension that still pervaded his parents' home. Michael and Vanessa remained distant at first, embarrassed by the exposure of their motivations and struggling with their financial problems without my imagined bailout. They eventually sold the Wellesley house, moving to a smaller home in a less prestigious neighborhood. Vanessa found work at a home decor store, her design experience valuable even in a modest role. Michael's architecture firm specialized in affordable housing projects, less lucrative but more reliable in the changing economy. 2 years after that Christmas confrontation, Michael visited Portland alone. Over dinner at my favorite local restaurant, he offered a more complete apology and explanation. Vanessa and I were caught up in appearances for so long, he said. Dad's death happened when I was trying to establish myself in circles that valued status above all else. I thought cutting ties with my middle-class origins would help me advance. By the time I realized what I'd sacrificed, pride made it impossible to admit I was wrong. And now? I asked. Now I understand what really matters. The kids have shown me that. They value their relationship with you because it's genuine, not because of what they can get from it. Our reconciliation was slow and sometimes painful. Trust, once broken, rebuilds gradually through consistent action, not promises. Michael and Vanessa eventually visited together, the meeting awkward but civil. With each interaction, the weight of decades of estrangement lightened slightly. The inheritance that briefly seemed to threaten my relationship with my son ultimately clarified it instead. Money didn't bring happiness, but it brought truth. It showed who valued me for myself and who saw me as a potential resource. That clarity, however painful, was ultimately healing. Today, 5 years after that Christmas confrontation, My relationship with my family bears little resemblance to what it was before. My grandchildren are now truly part of my life. Lucas practices international humanitarian law. Emma teaches elementary school like I once did, and Nathan studies environmental science in college. All three visit regularly, call often, and genuinely value my presence in their lives. Michael and Vanessa have changed too, humbled by financial reality and the near loss of their children's respect. Our relationship remains complicated, but has evolved into something authentic, if not always comfortable. We acknowledge the past without letting it determine our future. The greatest lesson I learned through this journey was the value of self-respect. For years, I blamed myself for the estrangement, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have been a better mother. The inheritance and its aftermath showed me that the problem was never my worth as a mother, but Michael's misplaced values. By standing up for myself that Christmas, I not only preserved my dignity, but inadvertently gave my grandchildren permission to question the values they'd been raised with. My modest life, rich in friendships, creativity, and community service, offered an alternative to the status-driven existence their parents had constructed. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who only showed interest when they thought they could benefit? Or have you reconnected with estranged relatives under complicated circumstances? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more about navigating complicated family dynamics with dignity and strength. Like and share if you know someone who might need encouragement to value themselves even when others don't. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to establish healthy boundaries and find peace in self-respect.